I am so excited to be here with all of you today. I wish it was in person, and I personally struggle with these like Zoom meetings and online venues and all that kind of stuff. So if you are so kind, I would love you all to keep the chat box going crazy. I love interactive audiences. If you want to turn your video cameras on and like wave or you know, whatever, I love that. That'll make me feel a lot more comfortable. Just knowing that I'm talking to real people, because that's what this is all about. That's what I love about community events like this, is when we as homeschoolers, as this family can come together and do something important. So what first thing I want to do is I'm going to ask you to participate a little bit in the chat box, and I want to hear from you. What are some examples of courage, people, heroes that you can think of that have demonstrated courage, whether in history, in your life? This could be fictional. It can be one of the martyrs of the early church. It can be Jim Elliot. It can be George Washington. It can be Frodo. Just throw in the chat box. Make sure you hit to everyone so that I can see your answer. But I would love to see some examples. Firefighter, your husband. That's so awesome. Served our country in the Navy. That's one example. What are some other examples of courage? And I don't need to call on you. You don't need to raise your hand. Just feel free to throw some examples. Joshua Chamberlain, hero from Maine, outstanding. The Hardy Boys, yes, the Hardy Boys were the first books that got me reading when I was young. Abraham Lincoln, serving his country, giving his life that people could be free. Grandfather served, and uncle who served in the Marine Corps. Winston Churchill, iconic. George Washington Carver. What an inspiration. Joan of Arc. Yes. You know, battle going on for 9 months. And then in 9 days, she shows up, and 9 days later they win, right? They're losing for 9 months, and then they win. Courage demonstrated. Nate Saint gave his life to share the gospel. I love this. Yes. And of course, Jesus giving all for us. What examples. I love it. All right, so I'm thinking of courage, and what does it take to be courageous? And I think of you guys, and I think of me when I first started working at HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. My first job at HSLDA was to be a lobbyist. And as a lobbyist, people are like, lobbyists don't have a good reputation, in case you haven't noticed. Lobbyists, lawyers, and HSLDA is made up of lobbyists and lawyers, but we're the good ones, right? We're not sitting here trying to manipulate the system. We're trying to be a voice for people. But lobbyists and lawyers, we think of people like them. Their job is to stand up and speak in court and all that kind of stuff. But we're asking you guys to take courage in your lives today and in these unsteady times, and do something, right? It's not just enough for us to get together here and be encouraged to be brave at home. We want to turn that courage into something. And I want to give you some confidence and some tools for how you can be courageous in your context, and especially when it comes to impacting your government and making a difference in the state capitol. So, how can you have the courage to speak to elected officials? Let me give you some practical steps so you can have confidence to act in courage. So I work with Generation Joshua. So we're a division of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And I feel like a bit of my thunder was stolen when I am sitting here listening to these great examples of leaders already. And when Representative Heidi Sampson was speaking, she started quoting from Joshua. From scripture, and it says, "Be strong and courageous." That's the charge in that passage, and she was hitting the nail on the head there. We need to be strong and courageous, but how can we do that? How can we do that in our context? So that's what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to go back go back to the 90s. So this story is now almost 3 decades old, but I want to start there because it's a pivotal start for several things. One, it's a start of homeschool, the homeschoolers as a acknowledged presence in the political world. So we're going to go back to the 90s to HR 6. The famous Battle of HR 6. If you were homeschooling in the 90s, you knew about this. Even if you weren't homeschooling in the 90s, many people heard about it. It was the moment where homeschoolers broke through. And let me kind of set the stage, because I know many of you aren't familiar with it, or it's been a while since you've heard the story. So back in the 90s, and some of you weren't even born then, right? I see a lot of young folks, which makes me super excited for the future, right? That's what this is all about. But so in the 90s, there was homeschooling was a thing. There were many homeschoolers out there, but it wasn't really thought of in terms of the national stage. It wasn't really thought of in terms of politics, and it wasn't mentioned hardly ever in legislation or speeches or anything like that. Well, there was a congressman from California who wanted to do some educational reforms, and his name was George. And George went to Congress and he wrote a bill. It was called HR 6, and it was going to do all kinds of things. It was 700 pages long. It spent about $7 billion a year. So it was a big bill. And most people were like, okay, it's typical congressional stuff. Very few people were paying super close attention. But there was a homeschool mom, and I think there's some homeschool moms in the audience. I see a couple of you smiling like, yep, that's me. There are a few homeschool moms in the audience. There was a homeschool mom who, I don't know why, this is like, I'm a nerd. I love literature. I love art, that I definitely would, and I love politics. So I'm a nerd, but she must have taken it to a whole new level because she decided to read that 700-page bill. And so she was reading through that bill, and she found something that concerned her. She saw that there was a section that said that every teacher in the United States should be certified to teach in every area that they taught. And she thought, wait a second, most homeschool moms are not certified in math and in English and in history and in physical education and in preschool reading and in every single area that they teach. And there's no exception here. It doesn't say all public school teachers. It doesn't say all private school teachers. It doesn't say all public and private school teachers. It says every teacher in the United States needs to be certified in every area that they teach. And so she was concerned. She said, does this apply to me? So she picked up the phone. So first off, she was brave enough to read. So we're talking about a woman with courage here. She was brave enough to read a 700-page bill. And then second, she was brave enough to say, I'm not sure, but I think I should call somebody. So she called HSLDA. She called the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and said, hey, I'm reading through this bill, HR 6, and this is what I read. What do you guys think? And as soon as our team saw that, they're like, oh, wow, this is a game changer. What can we do with this? Or what do we need to do with this? And at the time, remember, we're talking in the 90s, there weren't email blasts, there weren't anything. What they had is they had faxes and they had phones. They actually had to physically start calling people, and they set up phone chains where they would call people and ask them to call people and ask them to call people. They couldn't just post on a website and send out a link and say, everybody go to this link and read this article. They had to actually call people. And so they started calling homeschool moms, homeschool dads, homeschool students all across the country. And they said, hey, this is important. We need you to call Congress yourself and then talk to your friends and have them call Congress. And we were doing the same thing. We started talking with our allies. So we started talking with organizations like Homeschoolers of Maine, and we started talking to other ministries that were out doing stuff. We talked to people on the radio. We talked to people on TV. We did everything we could to get the word out there. And by the end of it, literally millions of people like you called Congress To that point, there had never been that many calls into Washington, D.C. in all of history. That campaign produced so many calls that the switchboard, the entire phone system in the Capitol collapsed. It did not work. They couldn't use their intercoms because their intercoms were connected to the same system as their phone lines. And so they couldn't call members of Congress and say, hey, it's time to vote. like everything started to grind to a halt in Washington, D.C. And they had never experienced that. They had never experienced a turnout like that. And obviously it was homeschoolers and then all the friends. You guys, if this happened today, it wouldn't be just all the homeschoolers getting up and calling. It would be you and getting your family and your friends and even maybe some of your enemies being like, hey, I know we don't agree on everything, but please call Washington, D.C. right now. That kind of thing. Congress was so overwhelmed, they were like, who do we call to stop this? What can we do to stop this? And so the leader of the House of Representatives started asking around, like, what's going on? What's wrong? And they're talking to people and they're like, okay, we know that there's a problem with HR 6. What do? They called HSLDA and HSLDA, we had all our phones going. So it's a miracle that he got through because we were making all of our calls out. And there was a phone that was ringing in an abandoned office. And a homeschool girl who was in her teens, she was about, I think, 15. She was walking by when that office, when it rang, and she was like, oh, I should probably answer that. So she picked up the phone. So the heroes of this story, like HSLDA is doing our part, but the heroes of this story are the mom who's reading the bill and the teenage homeschool girl who picks up the phone. She picks up the phone and she's like, hello? And it's like, yes, this is from the House leadership. We want to talk to somebody to see how we can get these phone calls to stop. She's like, one moment, please. she runs and gets her dad who works here. And it's like, hey, who do we talk to? And they got it to the right people. In the end, the leadership said, okay, we got to fix this. Everybody, we're going to fix this. Okay, everybody, we're going to fix this. They wrote an amendment that said this doesn't apply to homeschoolers, basically. And they bring it down to the floor of the House of Representatives and they say, all right, everybody, you better vote for this because if you don't, the homeschoolers will not stop calling. And in the end, that provision that would have effectively outlawed homeschooling across the United States in that early stage failed, with every single member of the House of Representatives voting against it and for the amendment, except for George, the member of Congress who wrote the original bill. And even as he voted for it, his argument was, this doesn't apply to homeschoolers anyway. So even the one person who voted for it was saying, nope, we're not gonna hurt the homeschoolers. This is too scary. So the reason I tell this story is because the heroes are multiple. They're people who were courageous. The teenage girl who was brave enough to pick up the phone when it was ringing, not knowing who was going to be on the other end of the line. The homeschool mom who was like, I'm not an expert in legislation, but I'm willing to read the 700-page bill for who knows what reason. And then to call HSLDA. So there are profiles of courage demonstrated right there. But the other reason I tell the story is because the impact of that story still echoes down to us almost, what are we talking? Almost 30 years later. 25 years later, we've got when I started working at HSLDA, I was going into Congress, meeting different members of the people on Capitol Hill, members of Congress, whatever, whoever would meet with me to talk about the wonders and the amazingness of homeschooling. Well, as I would go around, I would meet plenty of people who were too young to remember, but I also would meet regularly the people who were around that day, around that week. And they would tell me, oh, you're with the homeschoolers. We don't make the homeschoolers angry around here. We just don't do that. So it still has an impact of memory there. But even more interesting to me is how that story continues. And this is where you guys come in today. One of the things that's really important is homeschoolers not just paying attention to the world around them, but engaging it, to be courageous, to stand up and say, I am willing to make a difference. And so what I think of when I think of homeschoolers making a difference, I think of people like you who decide that I'm going to participate in a capital day. I'm going to go out of my way. I'm going to carve time out of my schedule and go and meet elected officials so that they can put a face to the idea of homeschooling. So they can be held accountable when they're thinking about regulating homeschooling, that they're going to think of you. And this is super, super important because what ends up happening is relationships are built. So let me go back to George. Remember Congressman George from California? His name is George Miller, but I like saying George because it's easy to remember. George, Congressman George, Representative Miller, from California. He decided to, or he started out in the 90s, just writing legislation on education. Well, because he was involved and he stayed around in the process, he rose in the ranks. And so years pass and he gets higher and higher in the system until he becomes the chairman of the Education Committee for the United States House of Representatives. He becomes the #1 policymaker for the United States of America in terms of education on the national level. I am a young, fresh out of college student. I start working at HSLDA doing lobbying, and we can't do it all ourselves. It was me and a friend of mine named Will. We were working hard in the halls of Congress, but we couldn't do it all ourselves. We needed help. So we reached out. We said, hey, we need some homeschoolers, some homeschool moms, homeschool teens, homeschool dads. We need your guys to show up. And so we would invite them down a couple times a year to just come to Washington, D.C. and go and meet members of Congress and build relationships when we couldn't, because there were only 2 of us. And there's 535 members of Congress, and that's just Congress, and we have the executive branch. There's a lot. So what we do is we bring them in and we would introduce them to these homeschool moms. And they were mostly people from the DC area, but there was one family that decided to drive. They would drive 3.5 hours from Pennsylvania to Washington, DC a couple times a year to do this for us. Talk about bravery, right? And they were just a regular homeschool family that heard the call. They heard that we needed help. And they had the courage to say, okay, what can we do? And we trained them. We told them what they could do. And they would go in and they would meet with George. They'd meet with Chairman Miller now. And they would just bring him cookies. They would, when they couldn't meet with him, they'd meet with his staff. They became fixtures in the regular work, office, where people knew who they were when they would stop by. George would recognize them and say, hey guys, how's it going? How's the kids? How's homeschooling going? All that kind of stuff. Well, one day there was a bill that came up in the House of Representatives, and it was going to go through Chairman Miller's committee. And we needed that bill to be changed because it was going to put some unnecessary regulations and requirements on homeschoolers all around the country. And we're like, homeschool moms don't need to be filling out more paperwork for the federal government. They can be spending their time with their kids, teaching their kids. That's where they need to be spending their time, not doing bureaucratic paperwork. So we call the family in Pennsylvania and say, hey, are you willing to drive 7 hours? 3 hours here, 3.5 hours here, 3.5 hours back. Come to Washington, D.C. We would love to have your help because you have a relationship with him that we do not. They came down. We gave them a packet of materials. We explained the issue. We said, this is what we need you to do. They go into his office. They meet with him. They give him some cookies. They tell some jokes. They reminisce for a minute, and then they say, hey, here's a problem. Can you help us? And even though he was the enemy in the 90s, regular homeschoolers built a relationship with him to the point where he said, okay, thank you. I will look at this and I will do what I can to help you because I know you. I know you. So that's what happened. He got the information, he made the change, and it was as simple as that. We didn't have to activate 2 million phone calls into Washington, D.C. Instead, we had one homeschool family that was willing to pick up and drive for 7 hours to capitalize on the relationship that they built. So, how does this apply to you? What I am asking you all to do is to work with the homeschoolers of Maine to build relationships with legislators. To build those relationships with legislators so that they can see the face of homeschoolers. Obviously, HSLDA, we do our part to support what you are doing there. And Homeschoolers of Maine is a wonderful organization that's doing their part, but we are stronger when we all work together. Just like in the 90s. Only now we don't need to make a phone tree and call our neighbors and ask our neighbors to do something. Instead, what we can do is we can get together and build direct relationships with the legislators. We don't need to mobilize 2 million phone calls if we can mobilize you. Get your kids, dress them up, walk down to the Capitol in your Capitol clothes and meet the legislators. Make it a field trip. Have fun. Get your picture taken with them. They always love getting pictures taken with kids. Spend that time. Build the relationship. You don't have to ask for anything. You just need to be there. But when the time comes, that is when the difference will be made. And one thing I didn't mention, not only was George the enemy in the 90s, but he was not of a political party that generally works with homeschoolers. He was known for working with the teachers' unions. He was not an easy person to work with, but relationships matter. And when that family was willing to drive down to Washington, D.C. and meet with him, he took the time because they had built a relationship with him and he recognized that relationship. They weren't his constituents. They weren't even from his state, but he saw them, he met with them, and he knew who they were. And he didn't want to hurt that family who he had met and built that relationship with. So that's what I'm asking you all to do. So practical tools. How do you build a relationship with a legislator? I have what I call the 3-meeting rule. The 3-meeting rule, and then I'll take questions. But the 3-meeting rule starts with the first time you meet a legislator, you introduce yourself. And I say, and you can find them in any number of places. Obviously, easy places to find them are their offices. You can just ask to have a meeting, schedule a field trip, that kind of stuff. But other places, they all run for office. So they're all doing campaign events. So you'll find them at party meetings. You'll find them at parades. You'll find them at fairs. You can find elected officials. Another place you can find them is at libraries and grand openings and stuff. Just look for them and you get on their email list, call them up and say, hey, is there a convenient time, whatever it takes. But the first time you meet them, the first thing you do is you introduce yourself and you tie it into something that they can tag you with. So obviously, when we're talking about homeschooling is the easy thing. So I would say, hi, George, or Congressman Miller, my name's Jeremiah, and I'm a homeschooler. So now he's met me, he has a tag for what it is, homeschooling, and my name. And then I just thank them. I just say something nice, like, thank you for being willing to serve your community. Even if I disagree with them on everything that they're doing, I can say, thank you for having a heart of public service. I just want it to be a warm interaction. I'm not asking them for anything at this point. I'm just introducing myself. This is meeting number 1. Introduce yourself, give them something to remember, AKA homeschooling, and thank them for something. That's meeting number 1. Meeting number 2, reintroduce yourself. Now, they will probably not remember you. Remember, these people, they meet a million people all the time. And even if they do kind of vaguely remember you, they will not remember your name, more than likely. Some people do, but it's like, don't assume that. Just go with, so what I do is I reintroduce myself. Hey, George, or hey, Congressman Miller. I don't know if you remember me, so I'm reminding them that they've met me before, even though they won't remember. I don't know if you remember me, but I saw you at the library. So yeah. Hi, Congressman George. My name's Jeremiah. I don't know if you remember me. I saw you at the library and wanted to say hello. They will always. I have never met, so even if they don't remember you, politicians, it's like in their blood. They always say, of course I remember you, Jeremiah. Because I gave them the tool to say that, because I told them that they met me at the library and my name, right? So if I just walked up to them and said, hey, remember me? They'd be like, trying, they'd be reaching, they don't have anything they can tag. But I walked up to them and said, hey, Congressman Miller, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Jeremiah. I met you at the library. I get all that out as fast as I can. And then they're like, of course I remember you, Jeremiah. It's good to see you again. Literally every single time. I've never had a politician not remember me when I give them the cheat sheet. I help them cheat. And then at that point, in the conversation, I bring up homeschooling again. So remember, I'm echoing back to the original conversation. I'm just bringing up homeschooling again. And then I ask them a question about something related to homeschooling, like, hey, do you work with a lot of homeschoolers, or do you have any family or friends that homeschool? You know, something like that. Just to underline the homeschool connection again. So remember, the first time you meet them, you just introduce yourself and tie it to something like homeschooling and then thank them for whatever. Second time, reintroduce yourself, remind them of where they met you last time, and ask them a question about the thing you tied yourself to, AKA homeschooling. So that's meeting number 2. So now, like, they've got it in their head. I remember Jeremiah, right? Third meeting. You do the same thing you did in the second meeting. Remind them of your name and give them some context, like homeschooling. So and by the third meeting, you'll be surprised. But by this time, most elected officials will actually remember you. They may not remember your name. They may not remember all the details. But if you give them enough, they'll probably remember your face by the third time. And so now you have gone from being a random citizen, which is where you started, to being a valued member of the community. A valued member of the community. In their minds, you have gone from being just an average Joe on the street to being like, oh, this person gets around. I've now seen them 3 times. So they must be big. They must be important. You know, they're everywhere I am. You know, like those are the types of things they're thinking. And as long as you haven't put off crazy vibes, you're you're going to be in good shape. And notice, we haven't given them a chance to think of you as crazy yet, because you're just talking to them about homeschooling. You're thanking them for their service. You ask them a question about how many homeschoolers they know, or not, if they know any, if their family or friends homeschool. You know, you're asking just kind questions. But now that you're a valued member of the community, now you have a voice. When you ask them to do something, they are 100 times more likely to listen. They are likely to listen to what you have to say at that point. So you have just upgraded yourself from average Joe to valued member of the community, and you are equipped to be like that family from Pennsylvania who drove down to Washington, D.C. to meet with George and say, hey, would you not let this pass? Would you please make this amendment? Would you protect homeschooling? Because this will affect me and my kids. So that's some tips to give you some practical steps to have some confidence, to add that to your courage so that you can act.